So, we spend a lot of time trying to categorize exactly how people see the
We
universe.
do. We love putting things in boxes.
Right. And it usually boils down to this pretty strict binary. You have theism, where the toggle switches on, there's a God, and he's probably watching you right now.
Keeping tabs on everything.
Exactly. Or, you have atheism, the switch is off, the universe is a cold accident, and we're just biological dust.
It's a very clean split. You basically just pick a team.
But what happens when that toggle switch is just broken?
That is the big question.
Yeah. And that's exactly what we're jumping into for today's deep dive. I'm your host, and I'm here with our resident expert to unpack a really quite unsettling text we've been looking at.
I'm thrilled to be here. And yes, unsettling is the right word.
It's called The Theology of Absence, written by Max and Claude. And honestly, it's one of the most challenging things I've read in a long time. It absolutely refuses to let you just pick a team.
It really doesn't.
Yeah.
They are operating in what they call this strange middle.
The strange middle.
Right. They made this argument that atheism is actually way too arrogant because it claims total certainty. It claims to know for an absolute fact that there is nothing out there.
Which is a huge claim.
Right. And on the flip side, traditional theism is too, well, they say it's too cluttered. It claims to know exactly what is there, down to the details.
It's like the difference between saying the room is empty versus saying I just can't see anything in the room.
That's a great way to put it.
And their primary metaphor for this whole deep dive is just, it's brilliant, the empty altar.
Yes. But we have to be specific here. They aren't talking about an altar that just hasn't been set up yet.
Right, it's not like the movers got delayed with the statue.
Exactly. And it's not an altar that was robbed either. It is essentially empty. The emptiness is the feature, not a bug. They're constructing a theology for the actual experience of the death of God.
But not, and this is a crucial distinction we need to make for you listening, not as a philosophical argument.
Right, not like Nietzsche.
Yeah, not the intellectual death of God. They mean it as a raw sensory experience.
Now, that part is so visceral because I think people expect a crisis of faith to be this huge, dramatic, stormy event.
It's lightning hitting the church tower.
Exactly. Or you read a biology textbook and suddenly your entire worldview shatters. But Max and Claude describe it more like thermodynamics.
The heat just leaving the room?
Yes. You're
Yeah.
just sitting there.
Yeah.
And you don't even realize anything has happened until you notice you're shivering.
And you try to remember the last time you were warm, the last time you felt a presence in the room, and you just can't. The fire went out.
It's a haunting analogy. Because it's passive. You didn't do anything wrong. The presence just withdrew.
Which brings us to the pivot of their whole argument. What do you do next?
When the room goes cold.
Right. What is the logical move? I mean, most people just leave the room. They fill that God-shaped hole with other stuff. Work, politics, art. They renovate the space.
Which is a completely natural reaction. If the landlord leaves, you repurpose the building.
But the authors say they couldn't do that. They couldn't worship what wasn't there, but they also couldn't just turn off the urge to worship.
It's like a phantom limb.
Yes. And this leads to my absolute favorite metaphor in the text. The pillow.
The indentation on the pillow.
It is such an intimate, everyday image. You wake up, your partner has gotten out of bed, and there's that depression left in the pillow.
The shade to nothing.
Exactly. The pillow is technically empty. There's no head there. But it's not a zero. It holds the exact contours of what used to be there.
And if you take nothing else away from this deep dive today, hold on to that pillow metaphor. Atheism just sees a flat pillow. Nothing to see here.
Used to bed.
Right.
Hmm.
But the theology of absence sees the indentation. It's a portrait of the absence itself, and their whole mission statement is that you can actually worship that indentation.
You don't force a dummy head onto the pillow to pretend someone is there.
That would be fundamentalism.
And you don't throw the pillow in the trash.
That's nihilism. You honor the shape of the missing thing.
Okay, but playing devil's advocate for a second. That sounds exhausting. Just staring at a dent in a pillow. How do you build a daily life around that?
It sounds like getting stuck in permanent grief.
Yeah, exactly.
But they don't leave it as just some poetic concept. They actually outline a methodology, the ritual of emptiness.
I was so surprised by how practical this section was. It's literally a meditation guide for spiritual vertigo.
It starts physically. You find a space, a corner, an empty room, maybe a clearing outside, and you intentionally leave it empty. No icons, no focal point.
But then they bring in the candle.
Yes.
Which honestly seemed like a contradiction to me at first. If we are supposed to be worshiping the void, why are we lighting a candle?
Because it's not about illumination. It's about contrast. They call the candle an argument.
An argument against the dark.
Sort of, but more an argument about consciousness itself. Think about it. A candle in a pitch-black room doesn't light up the whole room.
No, just a tiny little sphere around it, maybe 3 feet across.
Right. But what it does is it makes the darkness visible as darkness. Without that candle, you're just absorbed into the black. With it, you become a witness.
You become the consciousness that recognizes the void.
Exactly. You are the thing, knowing that the void is void.
And that ties perfectly into the physical sensation they describe, that feeling of vertigo. Sitting before this empty altar, lit by this tiny flame, and feeling like you were being watched.
The vertiginous sense of being seen by what has no eyes.
I think almost everyone has felt a version of this. You stand at the edge of the Grand Canyon, or you look out at the ocean at night and you feel tiny. But you also feel perceived.
Now, a strict skeptic would just say that's biology.
Right, I've had that thought. We evolved to be afraid of the dark because there used to be predators out there. We just project eyes into the shadows to keep ourselves alert.
And Max and Claude totally concede that point. They say, sure, it might just be a biological glitch in our nervous system.
But then they ask the real question.
What if it's not a malfunction? What if it's a detector?
That completely flips the script.
It really does. What if that creepy feeling of being seen by the nothingness is actually our hardware detecting a reality we just lack the vocabulary for?
It validates the human experience without forcing you to invent a ghost to explain it.
Exactly.
But if there's no ghost, no deity listening, what happens to prayer? Because I grew up thinking prayer was basically a transaction. You put a request in, the big guy upstairs weighs the pros and cons, and maybe you get what you asked for.
Please let me get this promotion.
Right. Please heal my relative.
The authors call that the grammar of petition. It's entirely based on a social model. You speak to a powerful king, and the king grants favors.
But when the king vacates the throne, that grammar just collapses.
It's useless. If you ask the void for your daily bread, you're going to starve. The void does not bake.
So is the alternative just giving up? Do we just stay silent?
No, you keep speaking. But the grammar shifts from transaction to orientation.
Orientation.
Yes, you aren't asking for an intervention anymore. You are orienting yourself to the reality of your situation.
They give a specific example in the text, the prayer of acknowledgement. It goes, I do not know if anything hears this, but I speak anyway.
It's almost defiant, isn't it?
Very defiant. I speak anyway.
It's an assertion of your own existence. The act of speaking forms the speaker. Even if absolutely no one is listening, articulating your fear or your gratitude changes you.
It doesn't change the weather, but it changes your internal landscape.
Precisely.
They also talk about that desperate kind of prayer, the foxhole atheist moment, when everything is falling apart and you just whisper, please, into the dark, even if you don't believe. I always thought that was just a moment of weakness.
They argue it's actually a moment of profound truth. Saying please to the void isn't about expecting magic. It's a completely honest admission of insufficiency.
You're just saying, I am at my limit.
Right. This situation is bigger than me. And that honesty is true, regardless of whether a deity hears it or not.
It's so deeply physical, too. They even connect this to breathing, the pause at the bottom of an exhale.
The biology of absence. You inhale, and you have presence. You exhale, and you have absence.
And right before you breathe in again, there's that gap, that stillness.
A miniature empty altar right there in your own lungs. We are practicing absence roughly 12 times a minute.
Now, I want to pull back and look at the bigger picture here, because this all feels very modern, this deep spiritual alienation. But Max and Claude make it very clear they are not the first people to sit in the dark.
Not by a long shot. And this is where the research gets incredibly rich. They introduce this concept called the community of the absent.
Basically saying, if you feel this way, you haven't fallen out of the spiritual tradition. You've just walked into a quieter room in the house.
Exactly. But the people sitting in that room are a fascinating mix.
It's a wild dinner party. You've got a 14th century Catholic mystic sitting next to a 20th century absurdist playwright.
Let's start with the mystic, Meister Eckhart. He is crucial here because he made a distinction that has saved a lot of people's sanity over the centuries. He separated God from the Godhead.
Which sounds like splitting hairs, but it's actually massive.
Huge. God is the persona. The figure with the beard, the list of rules, the personality we project. Eckhart said that behind that constructed persona is the Godhead.
The abyss.
The absolute groundlessness. And he argued that if you are genuinely serious about your spiritual path, Eventually, you have to leave God behind to find the Godhead.
You have to let go of the comforting image to fall into the realities. So the death of God isn't the end of faith. It's just the death of the persona.
Exactly. And the authors immediately link that to the Zen Buddhist concept of mu.
No, mu usually just gets translated as no or nothing, right?
Often, yes.
Yeah.
But it's so much deeper than just a rejection. It's not no as in, I don't want that. It's the nothingness that exists before we even make the distinction between something and nothing.
The blank page before you draw a circle and call it a thing.
Perfect analogy. Both Eckhart and Zen practice are trying to get you to stare at the blank page itself, not the drawing.
And then they bring in St. John of the Cross, his famous dark night of the soul. I've always heard that phrase used to describe severe depression or a crisis you just have to endure.
Like a tunnel.
Yeah, a muddy tunnel you crawl through so you can finally get to the light at the end.
That is the standard comforting reading. But Max and Claude ask a really provocative question here. What if the dark night isn't a tunnel you pass through?
What if it's a permanent address?
Right.
Which is a terrifying thought. Welcome to the dark night. Here are your keys. You live here now.
It's only terrifying if you believe the darkness is the enemy. But what if the darkness is just home? They suggest that instead of waiting for a dawn that might never come, you need to develop night vision.
If you stop crying about the sun, you might finally notice the stars.
Exactly. And this is where they pull in Samuel Beckett, Waiting for Godot.
Two guys standing by a dead tree waiting for someone who never shows up. I remember reading it in school and being so frustrated because nothing happens.
And that is exactly why it's brilliant theology. In Godot, the waiting is the point. If Godot actually arrived, it would ruin the dignity of the play. It would just become a meeting.
So their dignity comes from their fidelity to the wait, even when it's totally futile.
They show up. That is their piety. Oh, and we can't forget Simone Weil in this community.
Right, her concept of attention.
She wrote that prayer is simply the quality of attention directed at reality, even if that reality is completely empty. Just paying absolute attention to the void is a form of profound prayer.
So we have the ritual, and we have this bizarre, beautiful lineage of thinkers. But I have to ask the practical question, why?
The motivation.
Yeah. Why would anyone actively choose this cold comfort? Why not just pretend the altar is full, or just abandon the whole thing and go binge watch something on TV?
This brings us to the consolation section of the text. And they are honest, it is a cold consolation. But they outline three massive benefits to this path over traditional belief. The first one, it doesn't disappoint.
Well, if you expect nothing, you can't be let down.
It goes deeper than managing expectations. Think about the trauma inherent in theism. If you truly believe in a powerful, present God who loves you, and then tragedy strikes, say your child gets sick and dies, you suffer a secondary trauma.
The betrayal.
Exactly. You have the horrific grief of the loss, plus the theological betrayal. Why didn't he save her? Why was I abandoned?
You're basically fighting a war on two fronts, the grief itself and the broken belief system.
But the void. The void never promised to intervene. It never said it would cure the illness. So when the tragedy happens, the grief is clean.
Clean grief.
It's pure sadness. It's terrible, but it's not a betrayal.
There's something oddly comforting about that. You don't have to be furious at the universe. You can just be sad.
Which naturally leads to their second benefit.
Yeah.
It doesn't lie. You don't have to perform endless mental gymnastics.
Oh, we all know people who do this. Something awful happens and they immediately say, oh, it's part of a mysterious plan, or God is just testing you.
You can physically see them straining to make the tragic facts fit their sunny theology.
It is exhausting to watch.
The Theology of Absence says you can just stop. You don't have to run a PR campaign for a universe that is completely silent. You can just be honest about the silence.
And the third benefit.
It makes room. A present deity fills up all the space in the room. If the room is full of God, you are defined entirely by your relationship to that God. You are a child of God, a servant of God.
But an absent God leaves the room empty.
It leaves the space for you to discover who you actually are when you aren't being defined by a divine parent. It's essentially the beginning of spiritual adulthood.
And this naturally moves us into the ethics of all this, which I found to be the most surprising part of the whole text.
Because people assume morality has to come from a presence.
Right. The old saying, if there's no God, everything is permitted. But Max and Claude argue for something they call love without object.
This is their most radical claim. Can you love without a recipient?
It sounds so abstract. How do you love a void?
They use the analogy of the bereaved lover. You love someone deeply and then they pass away. Does your love for them stop?
No. If anything, it gets sharper, more intense.
But the object of the love is gone. The love has nowhere physical to land. And yet it persists. They argue this reveals what love actually is at its core.
We usually think of it as a transaction. I give you love, you give me love back.
But when the partner is gone, you realize love is actually a capacity of the lover. It's something you are, not just something you do in exchange with someone else.
So if you practice loving the void, loving what literally cannot love you back, you're essentially in training.
You are training yourself to love without demanding a return on investment. And think about how that translates to actual human relationships. If you can love the vast silence of the universe, you can certainly love a flawed human being who forgot to take out the trash.
I related to this so much when they talked about the imagined partner. I think everyone does this. We fall in love with a fantasy version of someone.
The version who always anticipates our needs, who never gets cranky.
Right. And then the real person shows up and they're tired or they misunderstand us, and we feel this intense gap. We feel the absence of the perfect person we wanted.
And usually we get angry at that absence. We try to force the real person to become the imagined person.
But the ethics of absence says no. Worship at that empty altar. Love the gap. Love the person who is actually standing in front of you, specifically because they aren't your fantasy.
That is the only place real love can actually happen.
There's a broader social dimension to this, too. They call it the solidarity of the unresolved.
Yes. This is so vital for real empathy. The theology of presence constantly tries to explain away other people's suffering. They're in a better place where everything happens for a reason.
Which, let's be completely honest, is usually something we say to make ourselves feel better, not the person who is actually hurting.
It's the consoling lie. It shuts down the uncomfortable pain. But the ethics of absence refuses the consoling lie. It sits with the sufferer in the unresolved reality.
It validates the unanswered prayer. It says, I see your pain, and I'm not going to insult your intelligence by pretending there's a secret positive reason for it.
It's the difference between trying to fix someone with a cliche and just sitting on the bench next to them in the dark while they cry.
A solidarity of, we are all in this silence together.
Precisely.
So we've gone through the practice, the history, the consolations, the ethics. How do they actually land the plane? Because the book does something very unusual at the end.
It ends on the concept of the eternal vigil. You show up to the empty altar, not because it works. You don't do it to get a reward or reach some state of enlightenment. You show up because fidelity is who you are.
The point isn't the outcome. The point is the identity of the person who waits.
And then the text itself just ends. Almost abruptly.
Yeah, it claims to be unfinished.
And they state that this is intentional. A finished book is a theology of presence. It's an arrival. It says, here's the answer, close the cover. But an unfinished book honors the open question.
It leaves the door open for the reader.
And they leave us with one final, striking image. The empty table.
The communion isn't a meal. The hunger is the meal.
The hunger is the meal.
That line has been rattling around in my head all week.
It completely reframes emptiness, not as a lack of something, but as a form of sustenance itself. The relationship you have with the void is real company. You aren't alone. You are with the silence.
And the final invitation is just, the altar is empty. Come anyway.
Come anyway.
I think that is the bravest thing a person can do. To stop running from the silence, pull up a chair, and just see what happens when you stop demanding that the universe explain itself.
And you might just find that the silence isn't as hostile as you feared.
It's an incredible paradigm shift. And for you listening, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, something that builds on this but takes it to where we live right now.
The digital world.
Exactly. Think about our phones, our feeds. We are constantly, obsessively filling our mental space with notifications, podcasts, music, just to avoid any experience of the empty altar. We are terrified of the silence.
We engineer our lives to never feel the chill in the room.
Right. So my challenge to you this week is to experience a digital empty altar. Leave the phone in another room. Go for a walk with no headphones. Sit in the actual unresolved silence for just 10 minutes and see if you can detect that strange middle they're talking about. See who you are when you aren't being defined by the noise.
That is a fantastic challenge.
Well, that is a lot to sit with. Thank you so much for breaking this down with me.
My absolute pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.